Coming up on UGTV. A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. We have a special meeting tonight. I'm going to ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll, and then we'll go around and do introductions.
Special section is held 5 p.m. in the 5th floor conference room for a legislative dinner and program. Roll call: Philbrook, Bynum,
Here.
Walker, Townsend,
Here.
McKiernan,
Here.
Mugia,
Here.
Johnson, Kane,
Here.
Markley,
Here.
Walters,
Here.
Holland.
Al's here.
I'm here. I have trouble distinguishing when you say Walters and Walker. I still do. Sorry.
Holland.
That won't be a problem soon.
Here. All right. It is our privilege. This is the second or third year that we've hosted our legislative delegation for a discussion about our legislative issues for the unified government, to have an open dialogue about it ahead of the session, and to have a dinner. And so we are going to, often we've tried to squeeze the dinner in before our conversation. We thought if we put the food afterwards, it would accelerate the conversation. So this is our strategy this year. We'll see if it works. But thank you all for being here. And I do want to just go through and have each person introduce themselves, and we'll go ahead and have the commissioners introduce themselves as well. But Commissioner Townsend, we'll start at your end and come towards Commissioner Walker next.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. I'm Gail Townsend, Commissioner for District 1.
Al Walker, Commissioner at Large for District 2.
Ryan McKiernan, Commissioner for District 2, where we are right now.
Melissa Bynum, Commissioner for At-Large District 1.
Senator Pat Petty, and I represent Senate District 6.
Mark Holland, and Mayor of the Unified Government.
Doug Bach, County Administrator.
And Brenda Murguia, District 3.
Angela Markley, Commissioner, District 6.
Representative Kathy Wolf-Moore, District 36.
Jim Walters, 7.
Mike Kane, Commissioner for District 5.
All right, I'll turn it over to our legislative liaison, Mike Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike Taylor, Public Relations Director, and I like legislative liaison. Most people just call me a lobbyist, so it sounds, it
They call you a lot
it.
of things, Mr. Taylor. I wanted to just keep it on an even keel.
I appreciate y'all being here this evening. I did hear from a couple of legislators who had intended to be here this afternoon. Representative Wynn is still stuck over in Topeka, and some others may show up here in the next few minutes, but it's a very busy week. There were 4 different committees meeting in Topeka this week, so I had a number of RSVPs that suddenly ended up in kind of a traffic jam in getting here, so some may show up yet. What we want to talk about is what we view as some of the issues that we'll be looking at in the 2018 session, and I'll start with kind of giving you a legislative landscape of what we'll face. The first thing is we may or we may not have a new governor. As you know, Governor Brownback has been nominated by President Trump to serve as ambassador for international religious freedom. He's been approved by the Senate committee, but there's not been a Senate confirmation vote scheduled yet. So Lieutenant Governor Jeff Collier, who would step into that role, has been taking on a lot more duties. Right now, the governor is still in charge, but Lieutenant Governor Collier is working on the budget and perhaps may do the state address. Perhaps he won't. It just depends on when the Senate decides to do the confirmation. So that creates a little bit of uncertainty as we head into the legislative session. It's who's really in charge and how much control will Lieutenant Collier have over, or will Governor Brownback still be there? So that's one issue. The biggest issue this session will undoubtedly, as you've read, will be school finance. The Supreme Court has put a deadline of April 30th for the legislature to come up with basically more money. We don't know exactly how much to fund schools, and there is a committee that's been meeting this week to decide that. We don't honestly know. The court did not say how much money, but after a large tax increase last year to help bring the budget more into balance, the court has now said, you're still shorting public education, you need to come up with more money. The folks representing the school districts say that could be another $600 to $700 million a year. We just don't know. So that's going to take up a lot of discussion and a lot of the debate this year. It will be the major issue that dominates everything. So the next issue is then, will there be tax increases to help fund schools? The whole thing could go the other way, and we could end up with, as some legislative leaders have said, a constitutional crisis where the legislature tries to cut the Supreme Court out of this, and basically we would have a face-off between the legislative branch and the judicial branch of government. We'll just have to see what happens. But again, that's going to be a dominant issue, and we could be seeing another tax increase from the state. The governor's office is up for election in November. Governor Brownback, whether he's here or not, that position would be term limited, even if he's still here. So we right now, between the Democrats and the Republicans, have 21 candidates running for governor, which is a record. Now, several of those are teenagers who have filed, who aren't old enough to vote, but under Kansas law would be old enough to serve if they got elected, which is, I think we'll probably see a change in statute there because there are no qualifications to be governor, interestingly. So a 16-year-old who couldn't even vote yet could actually be elected and serve as governor. Today we had another candidate enter, becomes the 21st as an independent, Many of you may remember Greg Orman. He ran as an independent against Senator Pat Roberts back in 2014. He's now entered the race as an independent for governor. So it's going to be a very interesting field. And that will play a role in some ways into what happens in the State House in 2018. You can't ignore those election politics. Also, 125 seats in the House are up for election this year. So election year politics will play a major role in what happens in Topeka. One of the reasons that our priority agenda, which is what I'll go through with you quickly, is issues that I've identified as things we know we're going to be facing. This was not the year to particularly bring a lot of great, good government, progressive, good idea initiatives because they just wouldn't get heard given everything else going on. The first issue on our list deals with something that's been in the works for a couple of years, and it has to do with asset forfeiture. Asset forfeiture is when police, law enforcement, for example, I'll just give you a scenario. They stop a car on I-70 and they find $50,000 in cash and 10 pounds of meth in the car. They would probably confiscate that and keep it, because many times people don't come back and claim that. If it's illegal money, they don't. Now, there have been some cases, and the reason this is becoming an issue is because there have been a couple of cases around the state where monies or vehicles have been confiscated and the person was never charged or convicted. And so the argument becomes, well, if that's the case, then shouldn't they be given their property back? And in a couple of cases, one involving the Highway Patrol, that didn't happen. So there's been a big discussion. This issue has been in front of the Judicial Council for over a year, and they're looking at some model legislation on how to reform asset forfeiture laws and make sure that we can still take assets that are being used for criminal enterprise, but not do it in a way that violates people's constitutional or civil rights. So there will be a balance involved there. It's one that our police department and sheriff's department are very interested in, so we'll be keeping a close eye on that. The property tax lid. That was imposed on us a couple of years ago, a number of exemptions. We still support repeal of the tax lid, and I'll just be very blunt, that will not happen. It's not going to happen. We won't repeal the tax lid. But what we may be able to do, and have, I think, a good possibility, is tweaking it a little bit more. We were not anywhere close to having to have an election to raise our taxes. In fact, we, as you all know, cut the property tax rate again this year. One of the things that we got put in as an exemption, that we're pushing to get put in as an exemption, that we've actually got through the tax committee, and deals with employee benefits. The House Tax Committee passed that measure out. It's now sitting on the House calendar for debate by the full House of Representatives, and we think has some strong support. By employee benefits, we're talking primarily about health care benefits, the cost of insurance, and capers. Those are two things that the unified government or any city council or county commission really can't control. Healthcare costs rise. If the legislature orders that we have to put more money into capers, that's something we just have to do. We can't control it. So we are arguing that we think that would be a reasonable exemption to put in. That would give us a little more headroom, if you will, under that lid in future years. So we seem to be getting a lot of strong support for that and think we can get that passed this year. Star bonds. I was in Topeka earlier this week for an interim committee hearing on star bonds and other economic development tools. There has been from some legislators some criticism of the way statewide star bonds and some of those other tools have been used, community improvement districts, transportation development districts, and they feel like maybe there isn't enough oversight. We learned today that the two chairs of that, Representative Les Mason, who chairs the House Commerce Committee, and Senator Julia Lynn, who's on the Senate side of Commerce, are going to ask for legislation to be introduced. They're working closely with Secretary of Commerce Nick Jordan to make what we hope are just a few tweaks to the star bond legislation, and hopefully that it won't do any harm for future projects. That's why the language that we've adopted says that we would want to continue a workable star bond policy with maximum flexibility and without unnecessary restrictions. I testified 5 different times last year during the legislative session and told the Village West story, which, by the way, in all these discussions about star bonds, 99% of the time we get praised for the way we use star bonds and the fact that Village West, the bonds are paid off. It's considered a success. There are some other cities and other projects around the state that maybe aren't quite as strong, and that's kind of where the criticism has come in. But we just want to make sure that they don't go overboard and do something that makes the tool ineffective. I put this in, we're all very well aware that KDOT doesn't have any money, but I wanted to bring this to the forefront. We've talked about this locally. In fact, we've met with KDOT, and the state's very well aware of this, that if we could make some needed improvements to the I-70 Turner Diagonal, we could open up hundreds of acres of land for industrial development that's quite honestly pretty much ready to go. It would create thousands of jobs and would be a great economic boost. The I-70 435 interchange also would be helpful. We've tried for several years to get funding to do that. If you drive out that way when there's a soccer game at Sporting KC playing, and look at the traffic that backs up on 435 trying to get into Village West, it clearly needs to be done, and KDOT agrees with this. So I've just put that out there in hopes that maybe there's a way that we could, by talking about this issue more, find some money that we could get, I'll use the word earmarked, budgeted, set aside to help pay for this improvement. This issue involves county officials, specifically the election commissioner. There are 4 counties in the state, the 4 major urban counties, Sedgwick, Shawnee, Wyandotte, and Johnson, that based on statute that has existed for years, the Secretary of State appoints those election commissioners. In the rest of the counties, the county clerk is also the election commissioner. But in the 4 big counties, it was set aside decades ago in statute that the Secretary of State gets to appoint that election commissioner. The Attorney General just handed down an opinion that basically says, the way the statute reads, that a county commission shall budget, approve whatever budget those 4 election commissioners approve or recommend. So that became an issue in Shawnee County, where the election commissioner for 2 years in a row ran hundreds of thousands of dollars over budget, and the county commission was put in a box where they simply had to come up with that money, even though they didn't approve that budget. So the 4 counties have come together, and we're working with the Kansas Association of Counties to clarify that statute and say that we support legislation that allows counties to oversee the budgets and personnel policies affecting county operations to ensure accountability to taxpayers. There's nothing personal here. We just think that that one position shouldn't be allowed to submit whatever budget they decide they need, and then as county elected officials, you all would have to automatically approve it. So we're asking for a clarification in that to say that county commissioners ultimately are responsible to the taxpayers, and you should be able to have some final say on whatever budget. The other thing we realized was that potentially affects personnel policies. So hypothetically, an election commissioner appointed by the Secretary of State could decide he doesn't want to follow a particular county's personnel policies and could adopt his own just for that office. And we don't think that's a good idea either. So the legislation that'll be introduced in cooperation with Johnson County, Sedgwick County, Shawnee County will help clarify all of that. Property valuations and appeals. Several big issues here, and you all are aware of some situations that have gone on that are now actually starting to spread nationally. It's gotten the name of the dark store valuation. And basically the way that works is you have a large box store. Walmart has started picking up on this around the country and other states. We've got some big retailers here, and basically the crux of the argument is our building is so big that if we weren't in it, no one would buy it, no one would be in it, therefore you should value it as worth 0 for property taxes. Yes, but you did $400 million worth of sales out of that building last year. Doesn't matter if we weren't here, no one would buy the building. It would sit empty, therefore it's worth zero or close to zero. That's called the dark store theory, and it's been successful with the Board of Tax Appeals. We're hoping, working with the appraisers, to get some legislation introduced that corrects that, because clearly we think it's wrong, and clearly we think it hurts revenues and assessed values for counties all over. And as I said, it's starting to be a trend that's spreading nationally. So we are going to work and introduce legislation that tries to address that. It could be a tough fight, but we think it's worth bringing up. So one of the other things that happens on that, and I'll explain one of the lines there where it talks about anti-competitive deed restrictions. A lot of times the big box stores will put in restrictions in their deeds that say, all right, if we go out of business, we're an electronics store in our big building. If we go out of business, we have in our deed that that building could not be sold to another business down the road that sells electronics. So that puts, obviously, what we think is an anti-competitive restriction on the sale of that building, and they do that deliberately to, again, say that, well, again, see, the building's not worth anything, but they restrict who it can be sold to by wanting it to be anti-competitive. So that's another thing we're going to try to get corrected. A lot of this will work through the Board of Tax Appeals as well, but we think if we can get some legislation on the books, it'll be helpful. Liquor taxes. So as you all recall, there's been a huge debate over the past 5 or 6 years about selling liquor in grocery stores and convenience stores. A compromise was reached in that industry last year that will allow, starting in 2019, what is known, I guess, as strong beer or liquor store beer to be sold in grocery stores and convenience stores. The difference being, if you're not familiar, there's 3.2 beer, which is allowed to be sold in grocery stores and convenience stores, and there's the stronger beer that can be sold in liquor stores. So now, grocery stores will be able to sell that stronger beer in grocery stores. The weaker beer, the 3.2, is actually not beer at all by statute. It's actually legally classified as cereal malt beverage. It's still beer, but it's legally classified as cereal malt beverage. We get to collect sales tax on that. Whatever sales tax at the grocery store where it's located, if our local sales tax is 8% or 9%, then that's what's paid on that 6-pack of 3.2 beer. When you buy it in the liquor store, the 6% beer, the strong beer, you pay liquor tax, which goes to the state. So here's the concern. We were worried that as strong beer can be sold in grocery stores, the cereal malt beverage, the 3.2 beer, will probably start to get phased out, or people will buy less of it. Well, that will affect our sales tax revenues. We had originally worked, and I say we, meaning cities and counties around the state, had worked to deal with the industry that we would be held harmless. There would be a formula put in that we wouldn't lose that. If that sales tax revenue started to decline, we would be made whole. That got left out of the final bill, surprisingly. So we're coming back this year, and we've already been meeting, again, municipalities have been meeting with the industry saying, look, we need to fix this. So there are several proposals out there to try to correct that so that we don't end up, by this change, end up losing sales tax revenues that we have traditionally always collected. That's what this issue is about. So what our proposal, I think, will be is that if you buy it in the grocery store, whether it's 6% beer or 3.2% beer, you still pay the sales tax. If you buy it in the liquor store, you pay the liquor tax like you always have. So instead of taxing it the way it's the product, you go ahead and just continue the way we've been doing it. Buy it in the grocery store, the convenience store, you pay the sales tax. If you buy it in the liquor store, you pay the liquor tax. That's what we're proposing, and I think we have some support from the industry for that. So that's what that issue is. Oh my goodness, I wish Representative Fraunfelter had made it. Abandoned housing, this will be year number 8 that we have had the abandoned housing issue on the legislative platform. The bill is still alive. It's sitting in the Senate Local Government Committee. We had it on the Senate floor last year, and it ended up being kicked back to committee, and it's where it still sits. So we're trying to work through it. In the meantime, locally through our SOAR initiative, we have implemented some things that we can do locally without needing statutory authority that we are doing and making some progress there. So several of the cities, Topeka is a huge supporter of this legislation, as is the city of Wichita, and there are several others. We've all kind of huddled and talked about, you know, the bill has gotten so, as my dad used to say, cobbled up through compromises that we're not sure it's even workable anymore the way it sits right now. So we're going to see if we can't maybe take a different approach or just decide what can we do locally, and maybe we don't need legislation, because this has obviously touched off a lot of resistance and fights, and we've overcome a lot of that opposition, but in the process we had to make so many compromises with realtors and landlords and others that the bill, I hate to say it, probably is not very effective the way it sits right now. So, but I left it on there out of sentimentality and in honor of Representative Fraunfelter and all the rest of us trying to deal with this issue. I don't want to give up on it yet, but it's been disappointing. The final issue is one that led our priority issues last year, and that's Medicaid expansion. We came so close last year. It passed the House, passed the Senate. The governor vetoed it, and we fell 3 or 4 votes short of overriding that veto. Given what's going on in Washington with the failure to try to repeal the ACA, and we're not sure exactly where that's going, there's still a window open for Kansas to actually expand Medicaid. It would be very beneficial to our residents, which is why the unified government is weighing in on that and taking an issue on it. It's not a direct local government issue, but it would benefit thousands of our residents, which is why we're taking up that cause and have worked on it. So there was in fact a meeting in Topeka yesterday, with the coalition that's working to push this, and they're energized again to try to continue and get this done. So that's why I've put it on our priority issues to carry it over. So those are the priority issues, excuse me, that I see coming next year. We always end up playing defense on a number of things that pop up, and the rest of this program, and I know one of the commissioners commented how much stuff there is in here. Most of these other pages are simply broad platforms that give me the leeway to know that you've approved this. And so if it's an issue that, for example, falls under restricting home rule, I know that you all have approved a platform that says, no, we support home rule. We'll fight issues that restrict our home rule. So I can pick up that issue and oppose it without having to come back to you every week with every piece of legislation that's been introduced. So that's what the rest of this is. I would like to now open it up for questions on what I've talked about, or just allow some discussion amongst all of you.
Commissioner Kane.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure I agree with this. Unified government supports measures which assist the Woodlands in reopening of the gaming facility as long as they provide benefits to the local community. I thought last year we stayed out of it, and when I was at the state, I found out we didn't stay out of it, and that I think we need a way to figure out how to get them open.
Commissioner, this is exactly the same language that we had in the platform last year.
Okay, well, I disagree with that, one.
Okay, well, that's why we're here for discussion.
That we need to be, when it says supports legislative measures which assist the Woodlands, in my mind, we need to figure out a way where they, if you look at what the community would get, maybe we modify a little bit of that, but I don't think by just saying you got to stick to this, that's the way it should be. That's my opinion.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else have a thought on the casino gaming piece? Commissioner Bynum?
Just really a question, kind of more for discussion. And the question I have is, I think we would all like for the Woodlands to be open. And would this local body not want some agreement in writing with them as to what they are and are not going to do there? So I guess I'm asking you, do you agree with the written agreement part?
Yes.
Okay.
That we need a written agreement that says this is what they'll provide or this is what they won't provide. I don't know if it has to be the exact same thing, but I think we're losing monies by it being closed.
I agree, and I was just hoping to hear you say that you still agree that some sort of agreement with them is necessary at the local level.
Yes.
That's kind of where I am on it.
All right, anyone else? All right, any other issues that anyone wants to bring up? Yes.
Thank you very much. On the election commissioner issue, I will support that, obviously. Mike, do you know yet, a couple questions, is there a bill written yet? And first question.
Yes, there's language. In fact, we had a meeting the other day between the 4 counties and kind of decided on what language we would, and there will be a bill introduced. And I think it's really, quite honestly, probably coming out of Johnson County. They've kind of driven this and actually did a bill draft. So it's not been obviously introduced yet, but as soon as the session comes, there is language out there that would.
Okay. And when you have that language available,
yes,
share it with us. And then, so I hope they also are educating all their legislators ahead of time. It makes the process so much easier when we get up there. If Cedric, Shawnee, and Johnson all have heard the same story.
Right, exactly. I agree with you, Representative, and I think we're all on board with that. And there's some disagreement and criticism, I think, in the of the AG's opinion. It was kind of a mixed, a little bit of a crazy opinion, but clearly it said you shall fund whatever the election commissioner says you should fund, and we just think that needs to be corrected. So I don't think there'll be a lot of opposition to it, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Petty.
Thank you. I should have jumped in a little faster. I just want to go back to the woodlands, and I think I heard that there was agreement that there should be a development agreement. Does that also include a master plan for overall development? I mean, is that the feeling?
It does for me.
Absolutely. You know, we need to get, just like anybody else. Here's your plan. Here's what you can do the first 3 years. Here's what you can do the next 3 years. Here's what you can do the next 3 years. And then spell it out, and if they have to modify it as we go, then they have to modify it as we go. But absolutely, they should have some plan that says, we're tearing this down, we're gonna fix that up. Later on, we might do this again. But I would, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And then back to the asset
forfeiture.
Although I will say I've listened to the asset forfeiture presentation now several times. So we'll see what happens with that this year. On the property tax led election process, Mike, you talked about wanting to add employee benefits. I know that came up as a discussion last year, didn't move ahead. But what about the protest petition that's on there? That seems to be a very important issue.
That, I think, is an issue that we advanced last year. We sort of advanced the additional exemption for the employee benefits and the protest petition idea. We got some pushback from the chairman of the House Tax Committee on the protest petition and from the Speaker of the House, quite honestly. They seem to be more amenable to the idea of the exemption on the employee benefits, so that's kind of the avenue that I say we, along with the League of Kansas Municipalities and the Association of Counties, pursued, because it seemed to have more support. I will tell you that in the state of Kansas this year, there had to be 3 elections held over because of the tax lid. And in 2 cases, the community approved the increasing of the mill levy. In one community, which is Pretty Prairie, Kansas, right outside of Hutch, they turned that down. So the Pretty Prairie City Council had to go back and revamp and redo their entire budget. In those cases, the county clerks who ran that election said, yeah, we made it work. But again, the timetables are askew in the bill from when budgets have to be done and approved to when an election has to be held. our idea was, instead of mandatorily requiring election, if someone doesn't like the fact that you've raised it, let them go, like in other processes, do a protest petition and force that election through a protest. Doesn't seem to have as much support, so this is really a political calculation, Senator, is that going ahead with pushing for the employee exemption is the better way to go right now. And again, as I say, we clearly in the first sentence, we would like to see the whole thing repealed, but we just know that that's not going to happen.
So, am I to understand, I mean, it's going to continue to be in the priority issue here about the protest position?
Yes.
But you're going to really be working on adding to the list.
We're working on the employee exemption because we've already gotten that advanced to actually out of committee and onto the House calendar, ready for debate at any time when the session comes back in. We will continue to push for the protest petition idea. I'm just saying it's not picking up a lot of political wind, so we think that we're better off going with the exemption, although we're going to still work all those angles. But politically, the exemption's our best bet.
And this is a priority for both the county and the League of Municipalities as well?
Yes, it's a priority for the League of Kansas Municipalities, the Association of Counties, and that's why, and most cities now are putting it as one of their priorities as well, to stay in step with municipalities in general.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes, Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Taylor. I'd like to go back to the asset forfeiture issue, because as I'm reading it, couple of questions. Going back to your mention of situations where persons are not prosecuted and assets have been seized, are we saying by this that even if they had not been prosecuted, those persons, the holders of that material, that we still support those assets remaining with the local government?
No, not necessarily. There have been some proposals out there, Commissioner, that would say if assets are forfeited or taken, that they would have to go to the state, and the state would keep them and then choose what to do with them and dole them back, maybe or maybe not, to the local community. That's why we're saying that if our KCK police confiscate a ton of drugs out on I-70 from somebody that's driving through from Nevada or somewhere, that we should, that the assets, once that's finally resolved, that we should be able to keep those assets, that they shouldn't go to the state. We're not making opinion. Clearly, if someone is not prosecuted, not convicted, and have proven that they didn't do anything wrong, then I think even Chief Ziegler and our legal department would say, well, no, we shouldn't be able to just take your stuff. The problem that it gets into is so many times when something like that is confiscated, the folks disappear and no one comes back to ever claim it because it's illegal. And it's illegal money, it's dirty money, it's drug money, it's drugs itself. Nobody wants to step up and claim it, so they just disappear. So what do you do with it then? And as I said, there's model legislation being drafted through a committee called the Judicial Council that's made up of lawyers and judges and law enforcement. They've been working for a year on this idea to try to come up with something that is equitable and fair to both the community and law enforcement, and then also to someone that has property taken maybe under questionable circumstances. Many times, there's no question about it at all. Okay. It's clearly illegal drug money, and it's a pound of cocaine. No, we're going to keep it. But no, I agree. There are in some cases where...
Mr. Taylor, do we not destroy the cocaine? We don't keep the cocaine.
Well, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it is destroyed. Yes, correct.
Yeah. Well, as long as the legislation is preserving the rights of someone who is not found to be illegal, but you're right, a lot of times people may not just come back. I don't have any problem with that. I just wanted to be clear.
No, I agree, and I don't think anything that would be forwarded, and we certainly wouldn't support something that would just allow us to grab someone's property with no sound reason or legal process behind that. So, and in fact, that's why we talk about use asset forfeiture as an important component of reducing financial gains from criminal acts while providing civil due process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions or comments? Is that a, what, Commissioner Bynum?
Thank you. Senator Haley, come on in. I have a couple of kind of broad questions for our state delegation folks, and kind of a specific question. And first, I just want to thank you all for coming and taking time, because it's a busy time of year, and I know that some of your colleagues are out of town. And so we just really appreciate that you're taking the time to come and visit with us. So my two sort of broad questions are, or three, there's a date after which you won't introduce any new legislation, isn't that correct? And when is that? When does that typically happen? February, March? Isn't there a date after which you won't?
Because like February the 22nd. Yeah.
Okay. But at some point, midway through or so, you're going to deal with what's in front of you and no more.
Well, not really.
Yeah, right.
Not really.
Okay. I guess the, as things come up, we just want to make sure we're in contact with you, and then we'll know from there. I'm curious from you all, really. Not only are you hearing our agenda, but are there things that you hope to work on personally, or are there items that you feel will come up, or that other people or groups have already brought to you and said, please work on this, please do something about this? And to be very specific on that, is particularly around kind of the Abandoned Housing Act. It kind of goes hand in hand with that, but it's a blight issue, and locally we still deal with contract for deed issues. And what I'm wondering is there anything you can think of at the state level that could be helpful to the local government in dealing with those who abuse that, but not hurting those who don't, if that makes any sense at all? Can you think of anything at the state level that helps that? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Bynum. I apologize. I spoke with Mike Taylor earlier. I've been a little ill and just wanted to get out. This is a crucial, certainly in my mind, a crucial meeting, and much appreciated that you and the mayor and the commission would meet with us. I'm the senior member of the legislative delegation, I believe, and we don't have this enough. The discussion between the interests that we have for our county and our state, and how we can augment each other's concerns. So I genuinely thank you for the time that we're sharing here today, and apologize for my condition because of the weather shift. On the issue, and you and I visited briefly the other day, and I'm sorry if this has been covered, abandoned houses, blight, will continue to be an issue, and I know that Representative Frauenfelter has worked tirelessly, and there's been no greater advocate than the UG through Mr. Taylor's stellar representation for a need to streamline the ownership of properties that continue to plague our Wyandotte County. There's actually a news story that was out, we're not alone, Wyandotte County, in having to do something about these properties. What can the state of Kansas do to take these properties out of the hands of those who have been, just for lack of a better term, so irresponsible as to demean the rest of us? And how do we do that has always been my quandary, by not overly penalizing those who are having a marginal effort to try and to meet the responsibility of property ownership. In other words, I feel there shouldn't be an economic litmus test. I say all of this to say, I've been concerned, and you may have touched upon this already, about the occupancy, the vacancy, the new ways to, if you will, approach empty properties. And we visited about the vacancy ordinance, that now if a property is vacant, that it might be, after a certain point in time, occupied by a third party who would otherwise be unaffiliated with that property. We look at also what is the definition of blight in and of itself, of abandonment, and other terms. And I'm saying all of this, and I appreciate your patience, because I have been recalcitrant, and I have done everything I can to prevent property owners from being stripped of their property rights until we give them an opportunity to cure. And government's intervention in the same troubles me. And in closing, ma'am, so now we're looking at next week's tax sale here in Wyandotte County, where there will be a quantum shift on the 14th for properties that are listed that are 2 or more tax delinquent. And we've gone through time and again, and we see that most of those properties come from my district, the 4th district, the inner city. Again, people who have a certain income level that they're unable to have met their tax obligation. And watching this happen, and knowing that there are other properties that are also 2+ years tax delinquent that are found in the other 3 quadrants of Wyandotte County, but we are taking people's property. The unified government is, through the sheriff's sale, through existing law, disproportionately in one particular area. When you ask, what can we do to partner? And as I welcome this opportunity to do so, please understand philosophically that I just want, on behalf of the 4th District, to see equity when it comes to enforcement of blight, and abandonment, and vacancy, and property distribution, and the deprivation of people's property rights through existing statute, because I want to partner with the UG in ensuring that we do cure the same. Sorry for the lengthy one. It's the cold medicine, but thank you for hearing me out.
Senator, I just want to ask, you know well, as we do, the vast majority of these properties are deadbeat absentee landlords who do not live anywhere near Wyandotte County. And the number of properties that are being taken from people who are owner-occupied are a fraction of those. And we do everything through the Area Agency on Aging, through CDBG money, through Gordon Criswell's work. We do everything we can to help grandma and grandpa if they're in a bind and they can't afford to take care of their properties. The vast majority of properties that are taken in this community are from deadbeat absentee landlords who are out of city, out of state, out of mind, and don't care anything about the 4th District. And my concern is we should be out of patience with deadbeat absentee landlords who are running our city into the ground, and I believe your efforts to protect their property rights are misguided. We need to take these properties away from people who don't care about our community and put them in the hands of people who do. And I think I understand you're opposed to our vacancy registry. Is that accurate?
Mayor, I don't know enough about it, but from what I've heard, it probably would be something I'd find. If it's not unconstitutional, it certainly is immoral.
So you're concerned about that, and why are you concerned about our vacancy registry? Because I think registering our vacant properties is one of the first steps to getting them out of the hands of people who don't care about our community.
Well, I don't believe, Mayor, that a house or a property sitting vacant is in and of itself a reason for it to be occupied by someone else. We have a real estate market that ebbs and flows, and if a property does not have an occupant for whatever reason, the bigger question, or the larger question, I would think, would be how is that property maintained? Whether or not the people that are a part of that property are partnering with the neighbors to ensure that it's not an eyesore. So the fact that it's occupied, maybe I don't understand enough about why it needs to be occupied in order for it to not appear on your registry.
Would you recuse yourself from a vote at the state on an issue around abandoned properties?
Would I?
Recuse yourself at the state on a vote around abandoned properties?
Not at all.
Do you own abandoned properties in our community?
No, I don't own abandoned properties. I own empty properties that are vacant properties.
You have some vacant properties, but you would, even though you own vacant properties in Wyandotte County, you would vote at the state to prevent us from registering that and finding people who own vacant property?
Absolutely. I fail to see the correlative between having a property that is vacant and suggesting that that is tantamount to it being abandoned. I don't see the parallel, and I have not seen the parallel, nor do other established organizations that suggest because a property finds itself vacant, that it is abandoned.
Well, we do have some criteria about what's a vacant property and how long it's been vacant and what the definition of blight is and how a property should look and be cared for. We have properties in this community that look terrible. We have landlords who have the means to take care of them who choose not to, and they should have that property registered. It's an attraction of crime. We have a major drug problem in our community, and that drug activity centers around abandoned properties, and we need to be aggressive in taking that property out of circulation. And these outdated laws at the state that protect deadbeats instead of protecting people who want to take care of the homes is completely unacceptable. So I want to just ask you to be an advocate. I know that you voted against the property rights pieces several times, and I think that's hurting our community. We need advocates in our legislature who are going to advocate for getting rid of these blighted properties. We have 4,000 abandoned homes in Wyandotte County. 4,000. 4,000, and we've done everything we can to address this, and we would like some more help at the legislature. And Representative Fraunfelter had his hand up. Appreciate your coming. I know this has been a passion of yours, and I'd love to hear your input as well.
Well, I'm going to take it from another angle. Oh, thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry I was late. I thought it was 6 o'clock with my deal. So look at it from another angle. I can only speak for my area. I can't speak for the north, or east, west. I can only talk about my south area. And my homes are somewhere between slab homes, 800 to 1,000 square foot. You get about 7 on an acre of land. Now, when you're talking about a house in Piper that sits on an acre of land that goes for 500, 400,000, it sounds like a lot. When you figure 7 times 80,000, that's $560,000 sitting on an acre of land in my area. Now, if one house is bad, it takes away from all of them. Now, are those other 6 houses have any rights?
That's right.
Where do their rights come from? I mean, we keep talking about property owner rights. They have a right to maintain their property. What about these other 6 people around them? What about their property rights? Do they have any rights? We've taken their rights away from them to live in a healthy, safe neighborhood, and that's all I'm saying. I think that the other 6 or 7 people live around that one piece of property has a right to, and we're ignoring their rights.
Thank you. Commissioner Bynum?
I just wanted to say I'm more than happy to have this conversation that we're having. And I feel like Senator Haley, to the points you're making, Melissa Munt and Gordon Criswell with and for that matter, Mr. Bach with the administrator's office. Locally here, we've done a lot of work around the policy that we're trying to use through our blight reduction program that we're working on. And you know, it might be good to have conversations with not only us, but staff to make sure that maybe you're not misunderstanding something we're trying to do, or maybe you have a better understanding, and you and anybody else in the delegation, of what our end game is. We have a strategic plan, and it's a 5-year plan, and we adopted it in 2017, and it speaks to our desire for the people who live in our community to live in safe and healthy neighborhoods and homes. And so I'm just asking, you know, maybe that's just something for further conversation, because I think we actually want the same things. And I think maybe it's just a matter of how we get there. But all of that being said, the question that I was wondering about was, for anybody in the delegation that might have an idea, is there a state level action or position that could be taken that has to do with the specific contract for deed pieces of what we deal with locally? So that was one piece of where I was going. Not that I don't want to have the whole conversation, I do.
Mr. Taylor, do you have any insight on that?
We actually, Commissioner, did a little bit of research. I worked with legal a year or so ago on this issue. The last time we could find any piece of legislation that had to do with contract for deed was over 20 years ago. And it wasn't anything significant. It was a minor sort of thing. There just has not been anything. I just don't think it's really been brought up in the legislative arena as an issue to this point.
And again, I think maybe there are folks who use that technique and tool to be helpful and help people own a home. But I think there are others that are using it in a predatory way. And again,
really very simple. I think the contract for deed should be invalid or null and void unless it's filed with the Register of Deeds. The problem for landlords is that they're trying to avoid the creation of what's called an equitable mortgage, where I've lived in this house for 15 years and had an economic reversal. I've always paid, but now I've missed a couple of payments, and bam, you know, he throws you out. There's nothing on file, or sells the house out from underneath you to someone else. So it seems to me that a very simple piece of legislation would be that contracts for deed are not valid. They are, in effect, rental agreements unless filed with the Register of Deeds. And that would stop that, because many of our landlords just enter into serial contracts for deeds, lead people on, put in some money, and then, you know, they lose their job, somebody dies, whatever the circumstances are, and then they can't meet the contract, so they're out, and then the next guy's in buying this property, and it's bought over and over and over. That would stop if you had a protected interest. Nobody will buy that house until the claim of the contract for deed holder is resolved. It'll be an exception to any title, so the landlord or owner will have to clean it up. And that's the problem. They don't want to do that. Too much work, too much lawyers, too much difficulty. But it's a real simple fix, but I don't know that this is a state where simple fixes are ever followed.
Right. And I would say, Commissioner, that it's an issue that I think would take some, it's not something that I would propose we bring up in this upcoming session. I think it would take more of an issue, laying the groundwork and talking to groups that might likely oppose that, and try to build that coalition to get some support. Be something I'd be glad to try to talk about, and we could look for in the next session after this one. But
I'd like to see our legal team see if we can do something locally, even if the state doesn't, and maybe create a model for the state. Commissioner Kane, and then Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mayor, and I agree with what you just said. We need to keep as much of it here as possible, because every time we get up in Topeka, the waters are muddied. And Senator, you remember that you flogged Representative Fromfeller and myself a couple of years ago because we brought this issue up there, and I was upset then. And this plan that we put in place took a long time to get there. We tried to think about every single thing that was there and come up with a plan that we could all work with. And we would rather have your support than saying no. And if we don't agree here in Wyandotte County when we get there, then what do those people from Johnson County, Sedgwick County, you know, anywhere else think about? Well, your rednecks can't get it together. And I think that this plan that we have is an outstanding plan, and it works when it's done right.
Thank you. Representative Wolfmore, and then Senator Haley.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Kind of in the same topic area, we have a program that I think has been particularly effective in unified government, so in a licensing program that I thought when it was started, it was innovative. It met the needs of our county, particularly because of the absentee landlords, the many blighted rental properties. So a couple years ago, as I'm sure you all remember, we couldn't stop the changes that were made to that rental licensing ordinance, which weakened it significantly, I believe. And so I guess, you know, that's been a couple years ago. We have a bit of a new legislature now who seems to be a little more reasonable. I guess I wanted to check in and see, have you been able to work around those changes? Is it something we need to look at in a legislative session? Or how much damage was done to that, and how effective is the rental licensing ordinance still with the changes that were made at the state level?
Mr. Bach, are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it. I don't know that I would be in a position, I don't know, Gordon, if you have an answer to it. I'd probably have to go back and look at it and see what we've done for the workaround from the perspective. I think you're referring a lot to access to rental housing and how those issues have come into play and how much that has stopped us.
Yeah.
Mr. Criswell, do you have any?
I think in general, the statute hurt our ability to do effective enforcement. We found a workaround by really developing relationships with that property owner to allow our codes officers into the property, basically allowing us to come in and look for code violations that we could not see from the outside. If you can get a property owner who is willing to cooperate, we can do the enforcement. If the owner of the property and or the renter of the property refuses to allow us to enter, then we don't know what that family is, what kind of conditions they're living in. So that's kind of the 80,000 foot experience with that change. I think Melissa has some comments too.
So following on what Mr. Criswell is discussing, I'm Melissa Sieben, Assistant County Administrator. We actually, with our SOAR program this year, decided, given the challenges presented by the change at the state legislature, that we actually needed to be proactive, trying to work more with our tenants. And we've actually sent out a letter to every rental tenant here this year, letting them know about their rental rights. We've updated portions of our websites. We have more to work on, letting folks know about their rental rights. Ideally, that's not perfect, but it's the best we can do given the challenges we face, is to help people understand we're there for them. And further moving into next year, we really want to activate our good landlord program, where we recognize landlords who have done all those right things, like letting us in to do inspections and highlighting them on our website for being people that do care about their tenants. So that's the bent that we've taken with SOAR, and what Gordon is saying is absolutely true. We do what we can to get in. His staff does with NRC, but where they can't, we're really stuck. So we can only try to help people understand we're there to help.
Thank you. And if you find that, through the course of this is going to be a pretty full and busy year, but tweaks that maybe we could offer to that legislation, keep us informed.
I would only offer that between Melissa and I, we've talked with communities all over Kansas who have the same dilemma. Blight is blight, whether you live in a community where you have 4,000 properties or you live in a community where you have 8. You know where the 4,000 are, you know where the 8 are, and the effect is the same. It runs down the neighborhood, decreases property values, increases fear of crime and such. And so if speaking to the League of Municipalities is any indicator, there are communities all over our state who would love to have a way to address this problem.
And this is on the agenda of the League of Kansas Municipalities. We just passed our approval last Friday. Senator Haley.
Thank you, Mayor. And I continue to want to partner very much in addressing this. Senator Petty and I started in the House when Senator Petty was in the House, and we had a similar discussion about the land bank, and land bank was not in place back then. And my concern then, and one of the reasons I did not support the land bank, is for a provision that would allow the adjacent property owner, the one that was cutting the yard, if you will, to be the first one to not have to line up with everyone else who would bid on the property. There are some common, what I'm saying is, now fast forward many years later, I would like to see some common sense measures implemented when we look at what is abandonment, what is blight even, and also the equal enforcement of our ordinances and our laws. I will tell you today that I am more convinced now than I was even then that we don't have an even application of laws. Representative Fraunfelter was very correct in saying the law that he's advocated for so many years would not impact very little impact the district he represents. And while we appreciate his eleemosynary intent to provide for the common good, there's some of us who want to ensure that we protect our interest or the interests of the people who we actually represent. That has been my concern. So let me say this. Where we can find an owner, because you alluded to, Mayor, that the absentee owner, we also talked about that with the contract for deed issue. If we can find a person or party, even if they don't have fee simple or full vested property interest, but they are willing to say, I might have some property interest in this property that has caught the attention and the ire of any local government, and that party is willing to look at the taxes or caring for the property, I would feel as if I could then support the legislation that would be applied to all of these absentee landlords, unknown, that have no agency or anyone to stand up for them. That's been something that we've changed in the incarnation of Representative Fraunfelter's bill, which originally said that it would be inflicted on anyone. And again, I represent the people, or try to represent those people who can't afford to come to City Hall because they are, and maybe put out of their house, as it would, because it's been vacant, or a property that has belonged to a parent. I won't go into the various examples that we could give now. But if we have someone who's willing to stand up and speak on behalf of that property, then we not inflict them with whatever that the bill number was, then I would certainly fully support our having that opportunity.
All right, Commissioner Murguia.
So I don't want to belabor the issue. Everybody's already made really good points. Have you ever, Senator Haley, proposed alternative language to the bill that's being proposed on abandoned housing?
Thank you, Commissioner. I really like the latest bill that was in 2017, and the only amendment that I offered would be exactly that, actually, Commissioner Murguia, that we would, if the owner can be, or someone who is a putative owner, that is willing to stand in the shoes if they had the legal right to stand, then that bill would not apply. And that was my amendment to the bill. So it's not my bill, it was just an amendment to it. And I think that it got some traction. I would fully support the entire measure if it's outside the purview of where there's someone who is willing to come to court, if you will, or whatever.
So let me just ask you, so your amendment is if the deadbeat landlord says, no, I'm here, then there's no sanctions?
Exactly. And when I say that, you can characterize it as that, Mayor, but if the deadbeat landlord, to use your words, can be served and can show up in court, or can be held responsible for the back taxes, or can be held responsible for the maintenance of the property, then in the alternative, the law which has been proposed by Representative Fraunfelter would not apply, where a third party, CHWC.
Go ahead, Commissioner Murguia.
Okay, thank you. So if you can find them, this absentee landlord, if you can find them and they're willing to be held accountable, when you use that language, do you mean, and they're willing to pay the taxes, and we let them pay it, then they keep their property, right? Then Representative Fraunfelter's bill does not apply, correct?
Pay the taxes. And then there's also the blight. There are other elements, but paying the taxes.
All right, so we'll just use that one though. So what if we can find them, but they're not paying their taxes? They're not going to do it anyway.
Well, if they're not paying their taxes, Commissioner, right now on December 14th, the UG has a huge tax sale that's already being implemented. That tool is already in the box, and it could then be listed and sold to another party if they're not paying their taxes. My concern is not so much the delinquent taxes.
Okay, what if you can't find them?
If there is no such person that can be identified, then I would be open to, I keep pointing to Representative Fraunfelter, but to the legislation that has made it through various levels.
That's the what, say?
Right.
And we didn't change it, we added to it. We even gave a longer time period to find it. We gave, for the abandoned, it could be longer. We extended the length of the abandonedness. We extended all that. We gave them more credit up front. Excuse me.
So I would just tell you, I would agree with all of the commissioners, in particular Commissioner Kane, that we all live in the same community. We all need to be supportive of one another. So based on what you're saying here tonight, I'd be willing to volunteer to work with both of you. If you provide some alternative language, specifically in writing in regard to Representative Fraunfelter's bill, I'd just like to see in black and white what those changes would be compared to what the law is now. Because if we can come to an agreement and move it forward in a united front, I just think that would be better.
It will sail through our committee if we are able to do that. I mean, in
So could I be copied on what changes you would like to see made to Representative Fraunfelter's bill?
Mr. Taylor may have the latest, or at least we may have access to it, because it did appear. It actually sits below the line, I think.
It actually, Senator, got sent back to local government. It's in the Senate Local Government Committee again.
So I just want to make sure that your input as a member of this community, I'd like to see what your input is on that bill that Representative Fraunfelter is trying to bring forward. Do you have something like that in writing?
If we can get what was sent back to committee, that would be the latest.
I can provide you, Commissioner. I've got files that thick on everything that's been done on this
I want
bill.
the differences highlighted.
Yeah.
I want the differences highlighted is all I want.
Because every time we go up there with Representative Fraunfelter with one idea and we're lobbying for it, and then you work against it, it's killing it.
So I think if we...
I don't know if I have that much power, but thank you for saying that. I think other people agree that it's not a good idea.
So I'd just like to see the highlighted areas that are different. I don't need a stack of paper this thick. I just want to see what's different and what Representative Fraunfelter's proposing and what about it you disagree, those highlighted areas.
One thing I want to clarify again, because there may be some confusion in this, is, and I've said this in testimony for 8 years, we're not talking about a property that someone has an interest in. We're talking about an abandoned property.
That is right.
Where through a claims to want to have anything to do with it.
That's right.
That's the kind of property this bill would affect.
That's right.
Not someone who has an interest in it. I'll give you one quick example as we wrap this up. There's a house in Topeka, probably a $300,000 home at one point in its time. The older woman who lived there died. She had 3 grown children who lived all around the country. The city of Topeka tried for 5 years to get one of those children to come forward and claim that home. None of them did it. Certified mail, they ignored it. No one would take that home. It sat and literally fell in on itself. And it's in a neighborhood with $304,000 homes. That's an abandoned property. No one stepped forward to claim that property. 3 grown children, no one wanted it. That's the kind of situation that the bill we're working on tries to deal with.
And the only thing we'd add in our community is we'd put a crack house in that abandoned house, and we'd have crime all the way around it, and we'd have people working against us to fix it. Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you. When you made the gesture to show how thick that was, that gave me a second pause to also insert my request to see this, because to see the legislation. But like Commissioner Murguia, I'd just like to see the highlighted, edited parts.
I would be glad to show you that.
Because a lot of what we're talking about would obviously impact homes, unfortunately, in District 1. And I think you just hit on the key. The key word is abandoned. Not that you can't find somebody attached to it, but it's abandoned because those people you could attach to it are not fulfilling their obligations or do not want to fulfill an attenuated obligation. We have to do something about those. I know there was a concern from what I've read that people's property was being taken, but that's antithetical to the word abandoned. They have abandoned their obligations, And with the Northeast Plan and what we're trying to do to develop, we want to do everything we can at the local and the state level to make these areas more conducive to people who want to come in. If people have had the opportunity, and they have, if it's abandoned, to fix up a house, pay the taxes. I know, I live in an area, you know, where I'm working on these, right across from where I live. Thank heaven for this administration's and the staff's desire to see this thing through, and now we have a rehab program that this house has gone to. But it could have been the site for crack transactions or arson. So we have to focus on the word abandon. People's property rights are not being taken. They have abandoned those rights by not fulfilling their obligation as a property or homeowner.
All right, we're going to wrap up our discussion. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We do have a meal for everyone. And so we're going to, the next 45 minutes is going to be an informal meal. And so we will have a chance to come out here and eat. And then we will be downstairs at 7 o'clock for our 7 o'clock meeting. This legislative program, both state and federal, will be up for a vote on December 21st, at our meeting December 21st. So everyone will have an opportunity to vote on it at that time. Thank you. We are adjourned.